Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore is continuing to make an ass of himself on the issue of gay marriage. He went on Fox News Sunday. Let's listen.
Here's what President Obama said this week about this case and what he said about you. Here he is, sir.
When federal law is in conflict with state law, federal law wins out.
Was there anything you'd say to him?
I think that the courts at the federal level will have something to say to him.
Mr. Chief Justice, your reaction to President Obama's comments?
Well, I'd like to tell President Obama that he's entirely correct. Federal law does trump state law. But what this Harvard professor, who is president of the United States, does not understand is that a trial court's decision on the constitutionality of a federal question is just that. It's an opinion. It may be law of the case before her. It is not overturning the Alabama Constitution. It's not made by judges. That's something very basic, something Speaker Boehner has just referred to about the constitutional violations of this president and the Supreme Court. We are seeing this. Those interpretations are not law. If they were, then the legislature would have no role. Legislators are to make law. Congress is to make law. The United States Supreme Court Constitution is law. So is the Alabama Constitution. We have a fundamental misunderstanding in our country that federal courts, by their mere utterance, make law. They do not make law, sir. They make law of the case applicable to the parties before them.
Wrong, wrong, wrong. So, yes, the Supreme Court doesn't make law, but no, that doesn't mean that therefore you don't have to listen to them. Because what they're doing is they're gauging the constitutionality of laws. So if they say to you, hey, Roy Moore, the thing that you think is constitutional is not constitutional, so therefore you need to change that, you don't get to say, well, I disagree with that. Okay, doesn't matter. Step the fuck aside then so somebody who understands the way America works can implement what they need to implement. No, it's amazing, man, watching this guy. I don't know why the media is taking him even semi-seriously and even doing these pseudo-debates with him. If anybody invites them on his or her show, they should just say, you're wrong, here's why you're wrong, this isn't a debatable issue, now say you're sorry and move along. Because it's not right. It's not right. Isn't it hilarious how conservatives change their view on the way the Supreme Court works depending on how the Supreme Court rules? So, and look, Justice Scalia is the perfect example of this. Justice Scalia is the biggest hypocrite in the history of the Supreme Court. So here's just one example. He always screams about, oh, states' rights. The federal government has no say on virtually anything at all. I mean, states get to choose. They are the laboratories of democracy. They get to make whatever laws they want, and that's the end of the conversation. So when he screams about states' rights, one example of a case where he did that is when Arizona decided they want to implement their own immigration policy, and they essentially want to do some things that conflict with federal immigration policy. So they implemented their own immigration policy and did whatever they wanted to do. And Antonin Scalia said, states' rights? I mean, what do you mean? If the federal government tells them that they can't protect the border the way that they deem fitting in Arizona, well, then they're not a sovereign state. And what is this? What are we dealing with here? A dictatorship? Do we live in a fascist country? Screaming about states' rights. Flip the conversation to marijuana laws in California, and what happened? All of a sudden, he's like, no, the supremacy clause of the Constitution says that federal law overrides state law, so the federal government can say, hey, weed is banned in California or Colorado or Washington, cannot legalize and cannot do medical marijuana. They can't do anything because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution. Federal law overrides state law. So it all depends on whatever they think politically. It all depends on whatever Antonin Scalia's opinion is how he determines what principle is at work here. So he's the biggest hypocrite in the country. And Roy Moore is the same way, man. He's the same way. You know, whenever the Supreme Court says something that's in line with a conservative ideology, he's like, oh, yeah, the Supreme Court, they're doing the right thing here, and they have the authority to make that decision. But when they inevitably say that, hey, you kind of have to allow gay marriage under the 14th Amendment and equal protection, what does he do? Oh, no, they don't have any authority whatsoever. They don't get to make laws. But they're not making a law. They're saying that according to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, equal protection under the law because of that, you have to treat gays equally in terms of marriage. That's what they're saying. And by the way, not that this is even necessary at this late point in the conversation, but just to give you the full context as to what's going on here, there was a lower judge in Alabama that essentially struck down Alabama's state constitution ban on gay marriage and said this is unconstitutional according to the federal constitution, so I'm striking that down. And what he did is he wanted to put a stay on that, which means he didn't want to allow gay people to marry until the Supreme Court makes its final ruling on that. So what did the Supreme Court do? Usually they would say, yes, I grant you a stay, and no gays can get married until we have the final say on it. But they actually didn't do that this time. The Supreme Court rejected the stay. They go, no, actually, yeah, gays can get married. So what everybody's saying, and they're right to say it, is that means that like 85%, 90% chance the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of gay marriage in all 50 states shortly. So now he's throwing a tantrum here, a toddler's fit. I don't want gays to get married, therefore the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction about anything ever because I say so. Stop whining. You know they do. You're just angry because they didn't rule your way. Too bad you're wrong.